Chapter 274 of My Hero Academia has just cemented this war arc as my favourite in the entire series. Up until now, I would have said probably the Overhaul arc was my favourite, but I can't deny any longer, this is straight up the most exciting stuff we have ever seen in this series, and I'll be explaining the latest chapter, which includes Shigaraki's new quirks, his fight with Endeavour, his connection to One For All, and how Bakugo and Deku's lives are now in genuine danger. The full chapter is not out yet, but what we do have is several leaked images with Japanese text and a full chapter summary in English, so those are the two things that we'll be going through today, but be sure to support the official release when it comes out on Sunday on the Shonen Jump app. The title of this chapter is very appropriately called Search. Now, way back in Kamino, we saw that All For One had stolen the quirk known as Search from Ragdoll, which is a power that allows her to monitor up to 100 people at one time and know their exact location and their weaknesses. Everyone assumed this power still resided inside All For One, as, you know, he was the one who stole it, but this chapter reveals that Shigaraki has it, and he uses this ability to hunt down Deku. Before we get into that part though, the chapter picks up where we left off on chapter 273, with Endeavour charging directly at Shigaraki with a clear intent to kill. At this point, virtually the entire city has been destroyed, with countless pro heroes dead, including my boy Crust, and Endeavour thinks to himself that he has to end it right here, right now, so that Shigaraki can't escape. Endeavour launches a new attack called Hell's Curtain, which surrounds Shigaraki in a gigantic wall of high temperature flames. He then gears up to give a Jet Burn attack, which is one that he previously used against the High-End Nomu. However, Shigaraki lunges towards Endeavour before he can release it, and he attempts to grab Endeavour's face and decay him. Luckily, the number one dodges the attack, literally like Keanu Reeves, but it's at this moment that we get a look at Shigaraki's new quirk. Despite all the flames around him, Shigaraki is as fine as ever, like he seemingly suffered no damage at all, which means that he has a regeneration quirk, and Endeavour would know that all too well because obviously he fought against this High-End Nomu with the same regeneration, so he identifies it and he's the one who calls it out as being that. Because of this, the number one changes his course of action and decides that instead of trying to burn Shigaraki, he'll use brute force to punch him into the ground below. So what he does, he uses flames to like fly above Shigaraki, and then when he's in the air, he pummels him right into the center of this giant rock. And this rock right here is actually all that remains of Jakku Hospital, like everything else has been completely decayed by Shigaraki. He then shoots his flames directly into the rock and radios the remaining heroes, trying to warn them that anyone who's capable of flying or just levitating and avoiding the ground, they may soon need to join the battle against Shigaraki. Despite that, his transmission is cut off when a seemingly fireproof Shigaraki, he emerges out of the flames and then attempts to grab Endeavour's wrist and decay him again. Shigaraki seems to really want this guy dead. Thanks to Endeavour's lightning fast reflexes though, he stops himself from getting killed by grabbing Shigaraki's arm and preventing the hand from making contact. And in normal circumstances, that would be a great thing because, you know, you would have neutralized the threat. But in this case, we see another one of Shigaraki's brand new quirks, which is some sort of energy blast that emits out of his hand directly in Endeavour's face. This sends him crashing through the rock, which has really taken a beating today, and then Endeavour hits the ground with a large thud and then just bounces on the ground for a little bit. This is the number one hero, guys. He's getting tossed around by a 20-year-old kid. Like, it's insane. Shigaraki notes how his instincts feel almost all-powerful, and that this is likely the result of All For One saving up all those quirks, all that experience, within the original All For One quirk, which obviously Shigaraki now possesses. From this wording, it's implied that the blast he just used against Endeavour wasn't actually a conscious decision, but rather it was more of an automatic reaction, so like his body just automatically did it, he didn't need to think. Much like how One For All contains the spirits of the previous users in some way, it seems that All For One contains the judgment, the reflexes, and the experience of its previous user. Shigaraki then pockets a few of the quirk-destroying bullets, which were being stored in this machine over here. Now, it's interesting to note that in chapter 272, Exodus actually destroyed this machine, but at the time we didn't know what it was. Then, in the last chapter, we found out that it was the machine being used to replicate the quirk-destroying bullets. Shigaraki takes what's remaining, which is about 3 or so quirk-destroying bullets. After he does that, he then reaches over into a box and pulls out one of the hands of his family members. I'm assuming that's just going to go on his face a bit later, but yeah, I guess it's worth mentioning. Something really strange begins to happen after this though. His whole body starts regenerating, but the way it's drawn, it kind of looks like the way Deku looked after he went infinite 100%. Like there's just this weird electricity looking substance all over his face, and it's kind of unclear what it actually is. I'm not gonna lie, when I first read this, I had this just crazy thought. I was thinking that All For One was actually beginning to take over Shigaraki's body, and I thought he was kind of like transforming in this moment. But once I put my thinking hat on and read the rest of the chapter, it was pretty obvious that wasn't the case. Endeavour then gets back up, as he always does, and charges directly at Shigaraki. Only this time, Shiggy is able to hold him back with just one hand. In the last chapter, there was a voice that appeared in Shigaraki's head against his will, and in this chapter it makes yet another appearance in this moment when he's fighting Endeavour, and it says that, "Of all the powers I obtained, there was an unexpected force that I could not wield." The voice is then about to say One For All, but is cut off when Shigaraki decides to take control of his own mind. I'm curious to know whether this is just the memories of All For One, or if the current All For One who's in jail is somehow sending this message to Shigaraki. Regardless, Shiggy himself acknowledges that he's changing, like there's something inside him that's driving him forward to obtain a certain power. He hears these thoughts in his head and he says out loud, "One For All." Naturally, Endeavour hears this, but obviously he knows nothing about One For All, so he just says, like in confusion, he's like, "One For All? What's that?" And this is transmitted over the radio to all the heroes, and Deku just freezes in horror. From his perspective, he's never told Endeavour about One For All, so this is a pretty freaky thing to be hearing through the radio, and it likely means that Shigaraki is looking for the quirk. This moment is when we see the search quirk in action, and remember, the chapter is called Search. This is a really important thing. Shigaraki begins to look for One For All, and the way the quirk works is that he sees lots of bright shining lights in the city below, with each of these lights seemingly representing one person. And of all the lights that are there, one is clearly shining brighter than the rest of them. This is of course Deku and One For All, and Shigaraki has the biggest smile on his face once he realizes who this is. The last time these two met, Shigaraki did say that Deku would die, so perhaps this smile is just the enjoyment of realizing he'll be able to fulfill his promise and also steal Deku's quirk in the process. If Shigaraki was to take One For All, or to get One For All by, threatening Bakugo and making Deku pass over the quirk to save his life, something like that, if that was to happen, I reckon Eri could come in quite useful in rewinding Deku. It wasn't too long ago that we got the reveal that Eri is training with Aizawa, so perhaps that was almost like a foreshadow of her having to put her powers into action pretty soon to help Deku. Anyway, Shigaraki decides to go immediately after Deku. He doesn't really have time to waste fighting with Endeavour anymore, and he uses a quirk that is very similar to Mirko. Shigaraki crouches down on the ground and then jumps into the sky, and as he's gliding through the air, you see that the jump created some kind of sonic boom, so like the force of his legs jumping up was just incredibly powerful. The force needed to do this would surely be the result of some kind of strength enhancing quirk, or maybe even a mutation quirk that's held within All For One that gives him super strong legs. As he heads directly towards the city, Endeavour follows behind him and warns the heroes over the radio that they need to expand their plans for the evacuation zone and basically just get everyone out of there as soon as you can. As the heroes and citizens begin to leave, Deku is still deep in thought, but being the true hero that he is, he turns around and decides to face Shigaraki head on. Bakugo immediately joins him by his side, as I'm assuming that all the heroes have that earpiece, so they all heard what Endeavour said, but obviously only Bakugo and Deku truly knows what it means. The two of them vow to protect One For All and blast into the sky, leaving all the other students behind. We then get a panel of Ochako, and this was really well drawn because you can tell exactly what she's feeling. Her concern for Deku in this moment is clearly very intense, but you can also tell she's a little bit confused as to why he's doing this. The two of them decide that they should lead Shigaraki to a deserted area, and according to the plot summary, Deku is genuinely concerned about how they're going to actually capture Shigaraki, given that he has all these new powers, and so he tries to think of abstract ways to capture him. From my perspective, without Professor Aizawa there, you're not realistically going to capture Shigaraki alive. The chapter ends with these two asking the rest of the guys to believe in them, and Shigaraki notices that Deku's going off in a different direction, so now Shigaraki's following Deku, Endeavour's following Shigaraki, and Bakugo and Deku are heading to the same location. I think that with Deku, Endeavour and Bakugo teaming up against Shigaraki, it will appear, perhaps the next chapter, that they have the upper hand, and perhaps it might even look like they're about to beat him. That is until Gigantomachia shows up with the rest of the League of Villains, and this is something that Shigaraki asked Gigantomachia to do in the last chapter, so he will show up, it's just a question of when. The moment he does, that's when the tide of battle will turn yet again. Chapter 274, for me, is like the beginning of the end of this arc. You know, you have several ongoing storylines that will be wrapped up in the upcoming chapters. And I'm not just talking about the Dabi equals Toya thing, I'm also thinking about the Quirk destroying bullets, you know, why did Shigaraki take those in this moment? And also just Shigaraki trying to acquire the power of One For All. I think if he was successful in doing that, that would not only be the end of the arc, but I think that my Bakugo time travel theory might actually be falling into place. But that's a story for another time, we'll see how things go over the next few weeks. That's all from me today, guys. Be sure to subscribe and also turn on notifications, as I have a video coming relatively soon about a potential My Hero Academia spin-off. So until then, peace out.